Good afternoon to all of our viewers in the Facebook group. I am Karen Seitz, and I am the lead teacher for a New Life Center, and I'm a mentor and teacher for married women to teach them how to find their happiness within and do the work to take down their walls. And today I'm here with David Cope, the founder of a New Life Center. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you, Karen.
Of
The sun
course.
is shining. Yesterday it was snowing,
I know.
and it's nice to have the sun back out here in beautiful Denver, Colorado.
I
So,
agree.
my name is David Cope, and I am a founder with my partner Peggy of a New Life Center. And we've been teaching individuals how to find happiness within themselves by building a relationship with themselves over the last 10 years. I got interested in uh, relationships because I got a divorce in the year 2000 and I was lost and I didn't know who I was anymore. And I didn't want to be on my deathbed someday looking back and saying, I wish I had a loving and intimate relationship. So I spent time after my divorce on myself, trying to understand what it is that makes a happy and fulfilling intimate relationship. And I started reading some books and actually found out that the things that I was reading were the very things that I was trying to do when I was married that didn't work. So what happened was I realized that in order to have an intimate relationship with another woman, I had to have an intimate relationship with myself. So in the last 10 years, we've been doing research and study in how to build relationships with yourself so you can have that intimacy within yourself and bring that to a relationship because it's very hard for most people to understand and grasp that if I don't have a relationship with myself and I'm disconnected to myself, I can't have asked my partner to provide that for me because if I don't have that intimacy with myself, I can never appreciate what the other person is doing for me. So the program that we are worked with over the last 10 years is to build intimacy within ourselves and bring that to a relationship so that we're not dependent on our partner to provide intimacy within ourselves, that we actually bring it to us and share it with our partner. So today, Karen, what's the topic that we're going to be talking about?
Our topic today is why trying to change your husband's behavior never works to save a marriage.
Oh, I thought that's what you're supposed to do.
I know we get it all wrong. I spent years trying to change my husband's behavior and thinking he was the problem and it was everything he was doing or not doing that was causing us to have the problems that we had and also causing me to be unhappy. And anything that my husband did to try to make those changes, when he would make those changes, I would continue to find fault in them because the real
Mm.
problem was that I was unhappy on the inside. So no matter what he did, it didn't change that.
So I think that's the central message for our video today is over the years in working with hundreds of different women, we've realized that a very common experience that women who are married have is that they're not happy in the inside. And most women know this, but have a hard time accepting that they're unhappy because we've talked about in previous videos, Karen, that a lot of women come to relationships and have a happy pill. They create a facade to the outside world that they're happy and enjoying their marriages, where inside and behind the doors they realize that they're very unhappy and they're struggling in themselves and finding themselves and really feel lost in their marriages, often stuck and not knowing how to get out. But they create a facade often on the outside world that they're happy and put together. So what we're talking about today really is understanding fundamentally if a woman is unhappy inside in her marriage, that no matter what her husband does or how he changes, it isn't going to change the fundamental fact that she's unhappy from the inside. Karen, can you talk about some of the reasons why, in working with women that come into you, see you, why they are unhappy and the struggle that they might have to realizing they're unhappy internally?
Yeah. So one of the things I see time and time again with many of the women that I work with, and also the place that I had to get to within myself, is seeing that when we don't know who we are and we don't have a relationship with ourselves, that causes us to be unhappy on the inside, because we're disconnected. We don't feel good about ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking to our outside world, whether that's our husbands or our marriage or our kids or our jobs, to try to fix that disconnection we're feeling on the inside, and try to fill us up. And it can't, because that has to come from inside. So David, I would say the biggest thing I see is a lot of times we get married for all of the wrong reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and get with our husbands for all the wrong reasons, and put this expectation on them to give us a life, to give us meaning and purpose. And when they can't do that, because nobody can except for ourselves, we get really lost from who we are, and we don't know who we are. And that's the biggest reason I see women coming in unhappy.
Yeah, and thank you, Karen, because the foundation of this Facebook group and what we teach is to realize that you can't change anybody else. And one of the problems often we run into is we hear women say, "Well, I'm going to get my husband to change," and or they marry him thinking they can change their husband. And when you try to change somebody, often what happens is that they get resistance and they withdraw, because when you want to change somebody, you're basically saying, I don't accept you for who you are. Knowing that the only person you can change is yourself allows you to realize that I need to change how I feel about myself and how I'm experiencing myself, which is the only person that I have control over. And then the other part that's really fundamental to what we teach is that nobody can make you happy. The happiness is an inside job, and looking to your husband to make you happy is futile, because if you're not happy inside, then nothing anybody can do, your husband can do, will change the fundamental unhappiness. So often the problem is when you go to marriage counseling, what happens is your marriage counselor typically will have the husband or wife sit in the room and share what are the issues that they're having between each other, and try to solve those issues by asking each person to change and do a better job in the issue at hand. For example, a very common one is communication. That most women come to a new life center, and they say that communication with my husband is a big issue. Traditional therapy will talk about how do you communicate better. You might talk about the love languages, knowing each other's needs. But the problem is if the woman in the marriage is fundamentally unhappy internally, those changes that the husband might do on a short term may solve things on a short term basis. But the key is to understand that if you are fundamentally unhappy, that you have to change that part of yourself in order for your husband's changes to have any real long-term benefit. Because no matter what your husband does eventually, if you're unhappy, it won't do the things that you want it to do, because you will always perceive what your husband does or doesn't do as the source of your unhappiness. The other part that we always want to talk about is that authentic intimacy, the intimacy that so many women crave in their marriage and say, my husband is distant, he's withdrawn, he's not there for me, I feel like I have a roommate. All of that comes from a place of not feeling connected to yourself and wanting somebody to give you that connection that you don't have for yourself, which is actually impossible for somebody to make you feel something that you don't have and feel within yourself. So understanding that fundamentally, if you're unhappy, the place and the source of the only true long-term change comes from working on making yourself happy. And why often women become unhappy when they get married, you touched on it, Karen, that we found over and over again, is women get married for the wrong reasons. They don't get married because they have a strong independent sense of who they are and come to the marriage bringing that independence and sense of self to their partner. What we do is we come to a marriage wanting our partner to fill us and to provide us that which we don't provide within ourselves. And eventually what happens is that it's impossible for our partners to fill us in places where we don't have the capacity to do that for ourselves. And we found that women get married because they think marriage is going to solve their unhappiness. So they're single and unhappy, and they think getting married will make them happy. But remember, if you are unhappy single, you're going to be unhappy married, because the source of your happiness is within us. But our mind wants to create this story illusion that the reason why I'm happy is something that I'm not getting or experiencing. And often women get married because they don't want to be alone. It's a very common thing. So they get married thinking, if I have somebody and wake up with somebody every day, I won't be alone. But one of the biggest complaints that women have when they're married and they come to work with us is, I feel so alone in my marriage. Well, again, the marriage isn't going to solve that unhappiness that makes you feel alone. And then another one that's very common, Karen, is women get married because they want to have children.
Yep.
And that they want their children to fill them up to make them happy. And then eventually they realize, oh my gosh, this
Good.
isn't making me happy.
Good.
Or they have one child and they realize, maybe if I had another child, I would be married or happy.
Yeah. Or
And
somehow thinking that having the children will then solve the issues in the marriage. Well, maybe we just need to have children, or we need to have one more, and then we'll get back to where we were.
Yeah, so and we're hoping to communicate that in order to have a long-term solution to your marriage and to your life is the ability to find happiness within yourself, and not to look to your husband and to others, your children or your family, to be the source of your happiness. That learning how to be the source of your happiness, to find it within, takes that burden and responsibility off from your husband, because it's hope it's, as a common sense adult, we understand that nobody can make you happy. So when you look to your husband to change him to do, if only my husband would do these things, then I would be happy. And of course, what happens with good men or in marriages, they try to do the things that they think their wives will be happy, only to find out that no matter what they do, they can't make their wife happy. But our mind convinces us that that's the reality and that's how it's supposed to work. So can you talk about maybe why women struggle with trying to find happiness and why they think that they have to change their husbands in order for them to be happy?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is, I know for me, I had always heard that no one and no thing can make me happy. That made sense to me. But I never been taught how to do that work to find my happiness
Mm.
within and find a relationship with myself. And so it was almost just, I think many of us run up against this where it's just our automatic default to
Mm.
continue looking externally to our husbands or to any number of things in our lives, trying to get them to change to make us happy. It's just this default. So I think one of the biggest challenges, David, is that we haven't been taught how to look within and do that
That's
work.
right.
And
That's
so
right.
we do things like read books, self-help books or relationship books, or we go to counseling. But what I found in my experience is all of those things were continually focused on the external, on the relationship, on my husband. And so that's what you were talking about. Then they just become band-aids.
Yeah.
And I still don't ever solve the fundamental issue, which is my own unhappiness within myself. So we have to learn how to do that.
So can you, we worked on a short list of sometimes women, they not sure if they're unhappy because they might, well, what their mind says is, well, my husband is what's making me unhappy. I don't think I'm unhappy myself. Well, what are some of the things that a woman can look at for her to know that she is unhappy, that it isn't her husband that's making her happy? What are some of the things that we can share with our listeners? If you're experiencing these things, then this is telling you that you are unhappy, not your husband.
Of course. And before I touch on some of what we came up with, David, I also just want to help normalize this for some of our viewers.
Thank you.
That I thought for a long time that unhappy was a bad word.
Yeah.
And above anything at all, to just pretend I was happy no matter what and never let myself know that I was unhappy. But when I was living in that, it made it impossible for me to change or move forward in my life. And it just got to a point where the pain of what I was experiencing in my marriage and all the energy I was spending searching and searching and searching for the answers, all of that became much more painful than actually doing something different and changing.
Yeah.
And that first step is being able to realize that I'm unhappy, or for you to realize that you're unhappy, not to beat yourself up, not to, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me, but to know that that's really normal. And once you see it and can recognize it, that's a good thing, because then you can actually do something about it. So that's why we want to see this, not
Thank you.
not to beat ourselves up or be wrong, but so we can actually do something about it and have a new experience.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Karen.
of course. And so these are some of the things that you can sit down with yourself and have some quiet time with yourself to reflect and really take a look to see if you can see these things in yourself. And that's going to give you a place to step forward from. So some benchmarks or signs that you're unhappy internally is you don't have your own life, that your life revolves around your husband or it revolves around your kids. There's nothing you do or not much that you do for yourself, just with you. And so if you've lost touch with having a life and having plans or dreams or goals of your own, that's a really good sign that you're unhappy internally. Being lost from who you are, not knowing who you are anymore. That again, kind of linking back to what I said before, everything's about your husband, or you started doing everything your husband likes to do. That was my big default in my relationship with my husband and past relationships. So you feel like you don't know who you are anymore and you're lost from yourself, or when you feel all the responsibility is on you, that all the burden falls on your shoulders to take care of things in the house or take care of things in the relationship, that if you don't do it, nobody will do it and you have to do everything. If that's your internal dialogue with yourself, again, a really good sign that you're unhappy on the inside. Another is always finding fault. One of my favorite things, David, that we've posted in our group is the Brene Brown video on blame. And and she drops a coffee cup in her kitchen, and her first thought was, damn you, Steve, which was her husband. Where as soon as something's going wrong or something doesn't go the way we want it to, the first thing we think or the first thing we do is look for whose fault is this. And in a marriage, 99.9% of the time, that person that you're looking to put the fault on is your husband. Complain. This is a big one. I see a lot. Complaining to your friends or commiserating with your friends.
Commiserating, yeah.
About the problems with your husband, or sitting around and all of you talking about all the things that you're unhappy about with your husband or bashing them. That's a really good sign that you're unhappy on the inside. And that commiserating and complaining with your friends, it just exasperates all of your problems and makes them so much bigger. And the last one that we have on here that's a good sign you can look for to start to know where you're at is if you have a lot of negative self-talk. If you're beating yourself up for the things that are wrong in your life or the things that are wrong in your marriage, or you're wallowing in what's wrong, you're not looking for solution or a way to move forward, you're staying stuck in the problem and swimming in it. That's a really good way. If any of that is going on, if any of these things are going on in any capacity, even if it's just a little bit, I know it can be a tough pill to swallow, but that's something you have to pay attention to see that you are unhappy on the inside. It doesn't matter if it's this much or this much. If any of it's going on, then that's what it's showing you.
Thank you, Karen. That was very clear. So there's another way that we often talk about looking to see our unhappiness, and we call it the common denominator. And maybe you can take a minute and just help to share the women what that means and how they can look at their relationships, not only their marriage, but other relationships and past relationships, to see the pattern of unhappiness. I know that often what happens to women is when they're not in a relationship, they're unhappy and feel alone. So then they get in a relationship and they think the relationship is going to make them happy, but they get into the relationship and they're unhappy. So then they break up and feel alone and say, gee, I guess I need to be in a relationship, and they get into a relationship again and they're unhappy, and eventually it's a cycle. Can you share a little bit about the common denominator, how women can look at a different way to help to see the commonality of their past and history?
And one of the things I'll do once we finish the video is David and I a while back did a video on common denominator. So I'll post that link in the comment section of this video so you can check it out, because there's a really great exercise that we talk about in that video that you can do to try to see this. So essentially, common denominator, it means exactly what it sounds like. When you think back to math, which I know is terrifying, at least it was for me because I was not a math person. Common denominator is seeing that you are the one constant in your life, that you are the only one that stayed the same in all of your relationships. So you can look back on your past relationships with men, even starting as early as high school. You can look at your relationships with your family members, at your relationships with your job or your career or with money. And what you can start to do is see what are some of the common issues that come up across the board in your life, that if you feel not enough, I'm just using that as one example. If you feel not enough in your marriage, and you feel not enough with, say, your dad or your mom, or you feel not enough at work, or you feel not enough with your kids, what's that showing you is you're the constant in that if you feel not enough in all those relationships, it's not about those external relationships. It's seeing you feel not enough in yourself, and you're projecting it out into all of those relationships and thinking it's your mom or your dad or your husband or your kids or your job making you feel that way, when it's not. It's coming from inside of you. And again, that's a good thing to see, Because if it's coming from inside of you, one, it simplifies things tremendously. You don't have to change all those different relationships. You just have to work on yourself to change that. And then you'll experience yourself in a new way in all of those relationships. So it simplifies things and it puts you in charge, because as long as you think it's those other relationships making you feel not enough, you can't change it, because you're constantly waiting for those other relationships to change how you're feeling. But when you can see it's you, and if it's showing up in all those different relationships, it can only be you, then you can actually do something about it to change that. And so it puts you in the driver's seat. It empowers you. Yeah.
So you used not enough. Another common one is I don't feel appreciated.
Yes.
Or I'm not seen or heard. Or another one is that I feel unimportant.
Yeah.
And if you have those themes in multiple relationships, if you turn them around, what happens is you realize, oh, that's me showing up the same person in each of my relationships, and my relationships are context for me to see that I'm the one that is feeling this way, because it's consistent through a number of different relationships. And as Karen said, the beauty is that it empowers you to change. That's why the topic of what we're talking about is why trying to change your husband never works to save your marriage, or just to build intimacy in your marriage, is because your husband can't make you feel something that you don't feel within yourself. So if you're feeling not enough or unimportant, nothing your husband can do can make you feel important or valued. That has to come from within you. So thank you. Karen, one of the wonderful things of realizing that you are unhappy in your marriage and working towards to find your happiness, how does that change your life or the women that you work with? How does that filter out into their other relationships once they begin to realize, oh my gosh, I am unhappy and it's affecting all these relationships and work and children? How does that permeate out into their whole life once they start changing themselves and find happiness within?
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating how the women that I work with, when they just here's some of the really great things that they experience. And this shows up in every area of their life. They start to feel relaxed, and the pressure is off of them. Think about when we think our unhappiness is stemming from all these external relationships, like the ones I just mentioned, obviously your husband, your marriage, your kids, your family, your job, then you go into this place of overwhelm and actually make your problems a lot bigger than they actually are. And so one of the biggest benefits for the women I work with in finding their happiness within is they feel a sense of relief, because they don't have to focus on all those other relationships. They just get to focus on themselves, which is something that most of them have been craving for a long time, is just the freedom to go within and work on themselves and finally be happy and get themselves to where they want to be in life. And then they start to feel good about themselves, and they start to like who they are, and they start to know who they are. And so then they just begin to show up in all the ways they're discovering themselves across the board. So, I'll have clients come in and, oh my gosh, my relationship with my mom is completely different. And we haven't even been working on their mom. They're working on their marriage. And the reason that is when you just work on yourself to change you, then of course you're going to show up differently in all of those other relationships too, and see more possibilities, see more opportunities that you could not see because you were blaming everything and everyone else for why you were unhappy. They start to feel more empowered and believe in themselves to accomplish the things they're wanting to accomplish in their life, or maybe for the first time ever are finally starting to see some of the things that they want to accomplish in their lives and that they want to go after. And just an overall confidence of, I can do this no matter what. that
That's beautiful.
I'm gonna be okay no matter what. So even if I change and show up and maybe, you know, my relationship doesn't change or or things start to fall apart in another area or other challenges come up, there's this confidence of I've got this.
Mhm.
I can do this.
Yeah.
Because I know who I am now, and they start to embrace some of the challenges and um, things they used to push away in their life. They actually embrace it and start to solve their problems.
Thank you, Karen. It's
Yeah.
it's interesting. So when we talk about being happy internally, we don't. It doesn't mean that we're getting up every day and going. Woo. It's a,
Mm-mm.
what is happiness really is a sense of contentment within oneself. It's not an emotional experience. It's an internal awareness that I'm okay
Yeah.
and I accept who I am and that I can accept the life that I have, not wanting to change who I am or be somebody different. It's a congruency with myself that for the first time that you feel like you have your back and you are important and you are enough and you start bringing that inner contentment and sense of I'm okay into your marriage, into your life, into the rest, into the world in a way that allows you to feel re-engaged and feel like you're alive again and you know who you are. And it's quite fascinating to watch the transformation, and not only in marriages but how it bleeds out into every aspect of a person's life because they start seeing life from the viewpoint of being happy rather than interpreting life from the viewpoint of them being unhappy. And it's amazing how dramatically that shifts a person's perspective on the very same life that they thought was making them unhappy can actually be the source of possibilities and appreciation for and gratitude for everything that they have and how fortunate they are.
Yeah, it is. To me, just being able to, because all the work that I teach the women that I work with, I'm doing myself in my own life. And
Mm,
to be able to look back and see how much I've changed. And for me, one of my biggest issues always my whole life, I can remember since going to school for the first time in kindergarten and being around other kids and starting to compare myself.
mm,
I would say from that time forward, I was constantly trying to be anybody other than who I
yeah,
was
that's
and
right.
constantly trying to change myself or think that I should look different or be different or have different talents or have different gifts and could never really get to know me from that place and accept myself. So the biggest transformation I see in myself and also in the women I work with is this deep acceptance of
Mm,
who we are
mm,
and no longer wanting to be anybody else,
yeah,
just wanting to be me, my clients just wanting to be themselves. And I can't tell you what a gift that is to give to yourself and how much freedom that creates internally and also in your life, um, to finally be at that place with yourself where you just want to be you.
it's very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Karen, before we wrap up, can you just remind our listeners the narrow context
Yeah.
that with a good man and what that means because sometimes this can feel so simplified.
Yeah.
It can't be that simple. If I'm unhappy and I'm being happy, then everything is magically turns around. But what's the criteria, the context that this works so successfully
Yeah.
in?
So what we're teaching and what we help women with is within the narrow framework of if you're a woman who has her walls up and is pushing her husband away or blaming him for your unhappiness and you're with a good man, that when you do the work to take your walls down, to find your happiness within and build a relationship with yourself, then you take your walls down and you begin to let your husband back in. And with a
Mhm.
good man, he will step up and change with you. And you have to experience it. You have to step into that and be willing to do that work for yourself. which Peggy will often say, why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want that relationship with yourself? And that when you do have that and you're with a good man, everything changes. It doesn't mean that good men don't have problems or flaws or issues, but the issues that you're having internally are the things that you have control over to change. And so when you do that, I promise exactly what happens is you will experience your husband in completely different ways and positive ways that you couldn't before because of having your walls up and pushing him away. Whereas if you're with what we call a bad boy, or a man who, when you married him, you knew that he wasn't quite trustworthy or reliable, or that he was unpredictable. And people probably warned you about, are you sure about this, right? That doesn't make him a bad person, but this wouldn't be the appropriate context to work on your marriage. You would need to take responsibility for your choice to be with the person you're with, understanding who they are, or do the work to get strong in yourself and leave, knowing that with a bad boy, you're not going to have a healthy relationship. It will be dysfunctional.
Great.
Yeah.
So Karen, can you kind of give a wrap up on the major points that we wanted to well, why changing your husband never works to save your marriage?
I can. So what we're talking about today, very simply put, is that if you're unhappy on the inside, and some of the ways that you can know that we talked about today is that if you don't have a life of your own, meaning you're not doing things for yourself and you don't have things you just enjoy for you, or if you're lost from who you are and you don't know who you are anymore, you feel like all the burden and responsibility is on you, you're always finding fault, you complain to your friends, you have negative self-talk, and you wallow in what's wrong in your marriage or your life, those signs are showing you that you're unhappy on the inside. And if you're unhappy on the inside, there is absolutely nothing that your husband can do, or nothing that could change externally in your marriage, or nothing anyone or anything else can do to make you happy. You've got to do the work to see that you're unhappy, and then start to build that relationship with yourself and feel good about yourself. And from that place, things in your marriage can begin to change, and you can experience your husband in the ways that you've been craving, and that connection and intimacy you've been looking for. Really what this is saying, that it starts with you, that if you don't do that work to become happy on the inside, then you're not going to see long-term permanent changes or resolution to the problems in your marriage.
Thank you, Karen.
Of course.
Good job.
Thanks. And so if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm seeing that I'm unhappy on the inside, and you want to see if we can help you with that, then I would love to speak with you. All you need to do is private message me, and we'll book a call and help you get clarity on what's not working in your marriage, and get underneath the story of the problems you think are going on, and help you get really clear on what's actually going on, to help you see where you want to be. And if we can help you get there, then we can talk about that too. But it all starts with a call, and you can private message me, and we can set something up that way.
Great. And we're very excited to share this innovative way of looking within yourself to solve your issues in your marriage. And thank you so much, Karen. As always, sharing this video. It's a pleasure working with you, knowing that you are a true teacher, taking this information and applying it in your marriage, as well as every teacher at a New Life Center, Peggy and I, and others that are here. We take it an utmost priority of personal integrity, that what we teach others are what we actually are doing for ourselves. So we have a genuineness in our understanding of how this works. And so thank you, Karen, for being you and sharing this so brilliantly to your clients and to the people at our Facebook.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you.
Okay. Have a nice day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.